My name's Dylan Sisson, and I'm here at the View talking about some new technologies for technical stuff, VR and 3D printing and all sorts of stuff.
So right behind you, there's some characters that you created. I wanted to start by asking you, how did this connection between what you create and the View conference come about?
Well, several years ago, I met Maria Elena, who runs the View conference, and I became good friends with her, and she became aware of my art and invited me to draw some of the creatures for her logo. And we've done that for several years now.
When it comes to these creations, where do you draw inspiration from? I know you have a robot this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this year has a robot, so there's a technology connection because robots are technology. And the other connection is with my imagination. I like monsters, I like drawing monsters, I like drawing robots, and so there's kind of a fit there.
Now, talk a little about the early days and how the Renderman software came about.
Well, the Renderman software came about, actually predates Pixar. So, when Pixar was founded, it was the computer graphics group, essentially the computer graphics group from ILM. And so that was purchased by Steve Jobs, and part of that was the technology that later became Renderman, the sort of this Ray's algorithm rendering technology. And so all the rendering technology came over to Pixar, and they started working on several different things, and they created Renderman as a product and productized it in 1989.
What are your thoughts about how that has evolved over those many years?
The evolution of Renderman's always been kind of driven by the demands of CG production for animation and visual effects. And so it's always pushed the edge of what was possible to create for the big screen. So it's been a very kind of practical renderer as far as taking as many efficiencies as possible to put the best looking image on the screen. And today it's very robust, and it's a very different renderer than it was in 1989.
What are your thoughts about the industry's evolution towards real-time 3D over the last few years?
Oh, well, I mean, if you look at computers and Moore's Law, the convergence between real-time rendering and cinematic rendering is coming at some point. And it's an interesting time to be in 3D graphics because, right now Renderman's becoming more interactive. The version Renderman 22 that we previewed at this year's SIGGRAPH is going to have kind of an always-on behavior. So when you're animating or modeling, you can turn the renderer on and it's going to behave interactively. So you have the real-time graphics, and you have these kind of traditionally offline renderers that are becoming kind of converging into a more interactive real-time experience.
At the same time, you guys are coming at it from that Hollywood angle and adding interactivity. We also are watching from the video game business those traditional game engines now being used more and more for previs and real-time. What are your thoughts about those two industries kind of colliding in this real-time 3D these next couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next 3 years. And I mean, it's not so much of a collision as sort of a kind of a merging of maybe the two in some different ways. So I think we'll see more aspects of these real-time engines being used in production for visual effects, and maybe you see some things like Renderman having some crossover as well, especially as we start rolling out some of these interactive technologies.
Are video games something you guys are looking at specifically?
At Pixar, basically we're focused on kind of producing stories and animation. We do work with other studios to create video games based on that IP, but our focus is purely telling stories.
Well, I just meant from just the purely Renderman technology side of things, with the new additions you guys are adding to it.
Right now we're not looking at that, but in the next 5 years or something, we might see some interesting things that we didn't consider before, but it's not something we're actively pursuing at all.
One of the things, the new mediums that people are starting to explore is virtual reality, which in a lot of ways is combining video game elements with traditional CGI storytelling elements. And I want to get your thoughts on VR as a storytelling medium.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's to be determined, right? We don't know how to really, how stories are gonna be told in VR. And that's something that we look at Pixar Animation Studios. We have different kind of spark groups that will kind of look at VR and look at different technologies and say, what are the opportunities there for us to tell stories? Right now, VR is interesting from maybe a set dressing perspective, or being able to lay out shots, and these are ideas that we're exploring. Renderman also supports stereo rendering for VR. So if you have a scene, that animation that you want to render in VR, it can do that out of box in stereo. So there's a lot of, it's really interesting time to be an artist, because the technology is offering us new things that we could do that we couldn't do before.
You are also here, you specifically talking about some new things you're doing in VR that maybe people haven't thought of doing before. Can you walk us through how you're using VR for fun?
Yeah, for like my own kind of projects, I'd like to look at the technology that's going on, and there's a lot of things happening in VR, and I wanted to check in and see where the technology was. So I took one of my characters and kind of got into modeling in VR using the Oculus Rift and the Medium software. So I modeled something, and then I kind of took it to completion and created this bottle opener. So this is a steel bottle opener that opens bottles, and printed it through Shapeways, and kind of a cool thing that I was pleased to be able to complete. Yeah.
And this is something that you're kind of passing on and showing how other people can do this.
Yeah, this is technology now where we can basically take something that we've created in VR, like a model, export that data set. It's a kind of a voxel-based model, so it gets exported as kind of a mesh that needs to be cleaned up, brought in. I bring it into Substance and Renderman and visualize it, then send it off for 3D printing and get something like this out of it. Because of the potentials of VR, like it even has like the little uvula that hangs in the back of the throat and inside on the bottom and all that kind of stuff. So you can do some nifty things with it and add lots of details with the scales and stuff. So this is something that anybody can do. The model I just upload to an online service bureau, Shapeways, and choose the material I want, and fix any like areas of the model that would need fixing, and get something back. Yeah.
That's really cool, and that's just something you do on the side when you're not doing.
Yeah, when as a hobby sort of thing, I've been working on this, and there's lots of different options. You can print in silver, or you can print in platinum or gold. The gold version was like $6,000, so that was out of my budget, so I just went with the steel version.
Cool. The other thing I wanted to ask when it comes to technology and filmmaking, what are the challenges? Because a traditional film will take multiple years, and technology evolves so quickly. Of when you're creating a vision, using your tech to create a vision, holding that across those 3-4 years, however long it takes, by the time you get to the completion of the project, and have everything in that same world.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question, because at Pixar, our productions are fairly long, and so it can run from like 4 to 6 years for a production, and you have to lock down the technology at the beginning of production, and maybe there's a couple things that you can change along the way, but for a feature film, you basically have to commit and stick with it to the end. With Renderman, it's interesting because we have big studios that use it, and also little smaller boutiques that also use the technology. And the smaller boutiques and smaller studios tend to be a little more agile, so they can adopt technology earlier on than a big studio might. So we get a lot of kind of feedback and input for the technology because of that, which all gets put back into the product.